to my kitchen, Gigi's Kitchen, where you get to learn all kinds of tips about cooking and new recipes to try out. Today our recipe is going to be a soup, a potato soup, and it's not a creamy, cheesy potato soup. This is a German style potato soup. It is a brothy soup with vegetables, and it doesn't take all day. It's a good evening meal if you want to spend an hour on it. It takes a bit of a prep, as all things do. And the other thing that we always have with our soups and stews in our house is cornbread. Now, we do always have a loaf of crusty bread if you want that, but most of the time they're looking for the cornbread. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about cornbread as well. Let's get ready to make some good old-fashioned German potato soup. Let's cook. Let's review our ingredients. I've got everything ready to go, so you don't have to watch me chop an onion. But just so we can review everything, I have my celery, my carrots, and half an onion. So this, when you have celery, carrots, and onion together, it's called a mirepoix, and it's used for a lot of bases for cooking when you're doing soups and stews and broths and those things. So I have my celery, which I've sliced, and I like this to be a little bit of a chunky soup. I've got my carrots that I've cut into rings. I've got a half of a medium-sized onion. Now, I did not have a white onion or a yellow onion, so I used shallots, but you could use whatever you have. So I have 2 small shallots equal to about 1/2 a medium onion. I have my green beans, which is traditional, and these are fresh green beans. You could use freezer green beans if you allow them to thaw. I wouldn't put them in the pot frozen, because then all the water from the green beans is going to go into your broth. So let them thaw out first, let them dry up a bit, and then put them in and let them cool down. I would stay away from canned green beans because they're all so soft already that by the time you get through cooking your soup, they will have dissolved into the broth. I also have 1 bay leaf. This is a fresh bay leaf. You could use a dried, and I have my nutmeg and my grater. We have about 1/4 of a cup of sliced bacon that we will render down for our fat. We have I'm going to say a good cup of sliced smoked ham. No honey ham, no sugary flavored ham here. This is just a good smoky ham. And then I have about a cup of sliced in rings smoked bratwurst that you can get in the deli section or wherever. So this is our base here, and then we will cut up our potatoes. And for our potatoes, I use a golden potato. Now, I do peel my potatoes first, but we have a bit of a discrepancy in my family about whether or not to peel the potatoes. I have one sister who peels half of her potatoes, and then I have another sister who doesn't peel potatoes at all. They just wash and cut them out and put them in there. I think either way is good. I'm going to set this aside for a second because we're going to talk about the cornbread. It is very traditional here for us to have cornbread, and so I wanted to go over about 3 important points I think are really important with cornbread, and I'm going to show you as we cook our cornbread. Once we get this going, then we're going to come back and put the cornbread in the oven and get it going as well. When you go into the store and you buy cornbread, you're going to buy cornmeal. You'll go to where the flour is, and you'll see packages of it, little bitty packages, big packages, giant packages, and they're all different. You really need to look at the labels on them. Now, I am not endorsed by any of these products. They're just what I had in the cabinet, so this is what I pulled out to show you. So, always look to make sure this says yellow cornmeal mix on it. This says yellow cornmeal. So there is, when we make cornbread, we always have in our mix, you have your cornmeal, you have your flour, your baking soda, your salt, your sugar, and then you have your wet ingredients, which are your eggs and your milk and your oil, and then you combine them all together. So So if you go and you pick up cornmeal, then you're going to have to add to this the flour and the other things to it. And I'll highly suggest that you turn to the back of your package and read it and see what it says. Every one of them will have a recipe, easy cornbread, and it will have a recipe there. Read your recipe there. And I stick to these recipes. I have my favorites, but I usually follow the recipe fairly closely. I think with all baking, it's really important that you really monitor your ratios. And this one says in here, to make cornbread, I will need all-purpose flour, the cornmeal, and some sugar, some baking powder, some salt, and so on, and milk and eggs and oil, blah, blah, blah. So right there, this is a little more prep to do than if you just bought the little box of Jiffy, okay, which is a cornmeal mix. And that's what this is, a cornmeal mix. So if I turn this one around and I read on the back of it, and this one does, it says Homestead Cornbread. And in here it just says 2 cups of best yellow cornmeal mix, and then it goes straight into the milk and 2 eggs and 2 tablespoons of oil or melted butter, whichever you want to use. So all the flour, the salt, and other things are in there, and you could add a little sugar if you want it to be more sweet or not so sweet. So make sure you pick up and read your package and make sure what you're getting. Now, if you go over and they have all the little packets lined up, and we do buy those packets, it's one of the few packets I will buy, is I will buy the packet meal mix for an individual serving, and it'll serve probably 2 people in this household. But I keep a big bag or a big carton in the cabinet because I make large amounts of cornbread when I make cornbread. So make sure you're reading your labels to see what it is that you're buying. Number 1, most important, make sure if you're getting a mix or you're getting the meal. Now, one thing that I will say, that once you mix up your meal, whether it's from scratch or you're using the mix, either one, especially with the mix, I always go back in and add some baking powder. I like mine to puff, and I just think sometimes the mix doesn't have enough puff to it for me. So for every serving or whatever pan size recipe amount, I would add a ½ teaspoon of double acting baking powder, and you'll see that says double acting on it. That means it really is 1 teaspoon. So if I add a ½ teaspoon. So in here I've mixed up a double batch of cornmeal mix here, and then I went ahead and added 1 teaspoon of baking powder so I can get that puff on it that I want. So number 1 tip, make sure you read your labels, know if you're getting meal or mix. Make sure you're adding your baking powder, and make sure your baking powder is fresh. The way you know if it's fresh is if you touch it on your tongue, and take your finger and stick it in there and put it on your tongue, it'll have a little fizz to it. You know it's good if it fizzes, okay? If it doesn't fizz, it's not gonna rise anything. You need to make sure it's good. Also, when you go to mix your wet ingredients into your dry ingredients, it will be the thing that you do right before you put it in the oven. You would not mix it up and let it sit. Cornmeal mix, once it's wet, you've mixed it, you pour it directly into your hot pan, and then it goes directly into the hot oven. And the other thing is that we never want to over mix it. It looks like it's not mixed well enough, but trust me, it is. If you mix and mix and mix until it's smooth, it will not rise. You have to just mix enough to get everything incorporated and then pour it straight into the pan. So there's a few tips on that. We will do all that in a minute, but first we're going to get started on our soup. So I'm gonna reposition the camera and then we'll get started. I've already put the bacon in and fried it down, rendered the fat out of it, and then I took the bacon out because it's a bit dry now, so it's not gonna be any good for our stew. But the fat is still there, so now I can start our mirepoix. Put that in there and let it fry a little bit. But I am going to add some white pepper and a little salt, because my stock I'm using is unsalted stock. So I can add the salt, and then later on I can adjust the salt and pepper as I go. Now I don't normally put black pepper in, but you can if you want. And then we're just going to stir this a bit, let it saute up a bit. It doesn't really need to get soft. All we're doing is heating it so it can start releasing its own oils and sugars and little bits of goodness. You notice I'm saving my green beans for last because they really don't need to saute. They just need to cook slowly with the stock. Now that sausage in hand will be salty, so that'll add a lot of salt and flavor. The bacon was salty, so the fat will be salty too. I'm going to take my nutmeg now, and I'm going to grate that over the top. There we go. Oh yeah, that smells really good. I'm going to saute that in. And I'm going to be ready to, the sausage in the pan has helped with the onions and celery to add to the fond on the bottom of the pan. I'm going to go ahead and throw in this last bit of vegetables here. And then we're going to add our potatoes and our stock and our bacon. Now this doesn't take hours to cook. Once we get it all together, you bring it to a boil and let it simmer until the potatoes are good and tender and the green beans are tender, and then it's ready. And so that's usually about 40 minutes at the most. You can see the size of my potato here. This is about the size I cut them to go in. And so it's a half a potato. I cut through here, and then I cut again through there. Here's my potato. And that's 5 large golden potatoes. Bay leaf. I'm going to stir this up a bit. Potatoes can take a lot of salt, but we'll let them cook a bit before we taste it and then salt it. Now when we go to add our stock and water, you can do half and half, do all stock, however you want to do it. You can do just water if you want. I like to do mine about 4 cups of stock and about 2 cups of water. So we just get over the top of the potatoes. And this is chicken stock. You can use beef stock and chicken stock and vegetable stock. I usually just stick with and here goes some water. So I'm going to add this to where I'm just over the potatoes. About so. So we're probably maybe just over the top of them. You can still see them in there. I'm going to get a really good stir first. Oh, look at that, it's running already. Okay, so we're going to give this a good stir. Put the lid on it, bring it to a good simmering boil, and then we're going to turn it down to a low flame and let it just simmer until the potatoes become soft. Moving that to the back. Now I'm going to turn on my oven to 400 degrees for my cornbread. I want this oven to be extremely hot when I put it in. And it's going to make some noise, so I hope you can hear me over it once I get it going too. Okay, we're going. I'm going to check on our soup. And it is boiling, so I am going to turn this down to a very low flame and continue to allow it to just simmer. Now my cornbread does take about 20 to 25 minutes. I'm doing a double batch. I need a bigger skillet, I need bigger space. And this is my big cast iron skillet. I do have oil in it right now. The flame's on. I am heating this. And you can see there's oil. That's the Wesson I put in the bottom. So it is going to be getting really hot while we mix up our cornbread. So here's our bowl. This is our cornbread mix here that we've got ready. It's already got everything in it. It has our cornmeal, our flour, everything that we need. And then I'm going to make a little well in the bottom, little hole in the bottom, and I do use my whisk. And so while this is heating, it's going to be getting really hot here in a minute. And this is my wet mixture. This has my milk, my eggs, and my oil. And my eggs are not broken. They are not scrambled in here. I will not scramble them until after I put them in the mix. So as you can see, I pour it in and it just stays in the middle there. There goes my eggs, pop, 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 and my oil. I want this to be good and hot. It's working on it. It's starting to shimmer. All right, I think we're getting there on this skillet. We want that oil good and hot when we put this in. So now I'm going to stir this up. There's my eggs. I'm going to break them. And then we're going to stir. And remember, we're not trying to beat it to death. We're just stirring it and incorporating it all together. And you will have lumps, but it will not be lumpy when it comes out of the pan. That's the only problem with using a whisk. It does get stuck up in the middle. Try to bang it until it comes out. And then I go at it again. And that's pretty much it. So you see, we're just stirring it all together. There's no whipping or beating or battering or folding, just a nice little stir to get everything incorporated, to get all the egg blended through. And we're ready for the skillet. If I drop this in, you'll see it's hot. I'm going to turn the skillet off. Get over there and get my spatula. And hopefully I'm going to put this in where you can see it, because it's going to fry up and around. And that's what I want. And then the whole thing goes in the oven. It's already cooking. It's puffing. It's getting crispy. And we scrape it all in there. Get our mix. Get our oven open. And go straight in the oven. I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to rotate my pan. I know they say, oh, all these new ovens, you don't have to do that anymore, but I promise you, everything cooks better when you do rotate it in the oven. And here we are with our soup, and it looks really good. It's reduced down. And as you can see, the broth has really turned creamy from the potatoes and the starch in the potatoes. Our little sausages, our beans are done. But with our potatoes, if you take one of them and you just kind of smash it a little, you can see how it just breaks apart. That's what we want. And so it's ready. So let's get our cornbread out and see how it looks. Now that looks like some good crusty cornbread right there. I'm going to go ahead and test it like you always do with a big giant toothpick. And look, it comes out clean all the way through. That's great. And one of the first things I always do is I put a slice in it to allow the steam to come out so it won't be soggy on the inside. So we're going to go ahead and cut it right through the middle, just like a piece of pie. You can cut it in squares if you want, but I usually do it in a pie. And remember, this is really hot. So if you're worried about it, you can always take it out. And the oil was so hot, when we put it in, it sealed the bottom. So voila, there you go. And look at that crusty bottom right there. That is wonderful, crispy, crusty cornbread. Ready to go for dinner. Soup and cornbread. I always like to scoop me a little bit, put it right in the middle, and then add a lot of broth right through there. And then here's your slice of cornbread to go with it. You can do this. Yum. Potato soup and cornbread. It's wonderful stuff. Have a good week. See you next time. Bye.